Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Socratic Satsang. Our topic this time is Amor Fati. It's a Latin word which means love for your fate or love your fate. A fabulous topic to get into, one of Nietzsche's and Marcus Aurelius's favorite. I think Epictetus also spoke about it. I've said that name wrong for sure. I'm sure we'll correct it during the session. Our first speaker today is Kirsten Nair. Over to you, Kirsten.
Amor Fati, the love of one's fate, was for Nietzsche an attitude of profound affirmation, to embrace life in its entirety, including hardship, and embody the highest yes to existence. He sharpened the idea with a thought experiment of eternal recurrence. So if you had to live your life, every joy and every pain, over and over again for eternity, kind of the ultimate Groundhog's Day. It's not a literal claim, but rather a way of testing our relationship to life. If the idea feels horrifying, it reveals the points of tension we carry with our past as it has been lived. Conversely, if we can affirm our existence so fully that we would choose to relive it endlessly, that would represent the fullest expression of Amor Fati. When I first contemplated this, I felt gutted. To imagine reliving the highs was effortless, even blissful, but to envision re-experiencing the losses, the traumas, and struggles felt almost unbearable. Yet I began to consider how these same experiences might feel if lived differently, if I approached them with acceptance, surrender, and trust rather than resistance and control, especially since resistance doesn't alter what is beyond our control anyway, and often deepens the pain by keeping us trapped in cycles of struggle. Of course, life doesn't offer redos, but in the present, we can still relate to all the things that we have endured, hardships, mistakes, and even failures by embracing them from a life affirming stance. My initial hesitation with Amor Fati stemmed from its apparent closeness to resignation. At first, it seemed indistinguishable from fatalism, the belief that whatever happens is inevitable and beyond our influence. Yet further exploration clarified that it's not about passivity. To love one's fate is not to surrender agency, but to embrace that both what comes upon us and the choices we make are integral to fate. And psychology offers a parallel in practices such as radical acceptance and commitment therapy. Both begin with the premise of not resisting or denying what is, but rather turning fully toward reality, however difficult, not with passivity or resignation, but facing circumstances as they are, and from there, exercising the freedom to act. And by withdrawing energy from resisting what is, we can reclaim it for values driven choices that are grounded in reality. So the shift that comes from embracing circumstances almost as though we had chosen them, in that sense, can be profoundly empowering. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Kirsten. Denise, over to you.
Thank you. So Kirsten hit on two things that really resonate with me, and that's kind of the dichotomy of surrender and control. So when I heard those words, so that's kind of in what I wanted to say as well. Huge fan of Marcus Aurelius. So I found a quote from him with regard to Amor Fati, which is welcome every event as if you had chosen it. And that really kind of stuck with me. So that idea of welcoming, of opening the door to whatever life brings, as I said, really resonates with me. Yet it isn't always easy. So there are moments where I've tried to steer everything or control everything only to feel more off course than ever. So those experiences remind me that life has its own rhythm, larger than any of my plans or preferences, so it seems. And we see that rhythm everywhere. We're part of this planet, And so, we see rhythm in tides, in seasons of nature, in the pulse that we have, the breath in our bodies. And just like I said, ties into kind of the great cycles of the planet itself. So it's the same quiet order, when I think of my work on quantum consciousness, that points in the same direction, which is kind of an underlying field in which events rise and fall with kind of cosmic timing. But at the same time, many of us are drawn to manifesting, right? Our dreams, our intentions, envisioning what we want to create. So I don't see this as opposed to Amor Fati, but for me, like manifesting is all about, or manifesting your fate is all about offering a direction or a dream. Whereas the concept of Amor Fati is more the willingness to love the way life actually unfolds, even if it differs from the picture that's in our minds. So it's like it's intention without that tight control. And I know, Vin, you had spoken about this once, surrender, and obviously Kirsten it just mentioned it. And I really feel that kind of belongs here because it's not really defeat, but it's almost like a quiet liberation of trusting a larger pattern of intelligence and timing. And of course, from a metaphysical viewpoint, nothing is random. So each encounter and challenge carries purpose. So Amor Fati, manifesting and surrender to me kind of all come together. I set intentions, I welcome what arrives, and I meet each moment as if I had chosen it. So I'm really trying to embrace that concept. And in that space, life often unfolds more gracefully at times than I would have imagined, regardless, if I had full, complete control over everything. So anyway, that's kind of my take on this to start.
Thank you. Over to you, Tulip.
Just a couple lines that I would like to share. What came to me is like when I do readings for people, um, for Vedic astrology, very often people say, "Why me?" or "Why this?" So when am I? What I simply say is that plans are not made we are a part of the larger plan, similar to what Denise had just said. We are a part of the larger plan. Plans are not made around us. So it's not it's okay, I'm fitting in the larger plan. That's something that I always tell everyone. And for myself as well, I remind myself when things are going in a certain way, I'm like, okay, just change the angle of the way you're viewing your fate. And you're like, okay, interesting. Bring it on.
Thank you. Joe, over to you, brother.
Two things I'll touch on. One is partly a recollection, and at first, and I've encountered this idea previously, but I find it in some ways a difficult one to embrace, if I can call it that. Calling back to, let's say, the 1990s, and my life was going along swimmingly, and lots of kids and a home and garden and all that good stuff, and business was going well. And then a massive shock hit us. And for years, I had to try and say, well, there's got to be some good in this. But it didn't take too long, even at the time, to say it was remarkable how it made us all better in a way. And it was one of my and it's almost a lesson that's actually gotten stronger over the years, that the trials, even on an epic scale, were, they were trials, but there was a lot of positive in it. And for myself, it converted me from being almost an insufferably ambitious business person who was not happy if I weren't trampling on somebody, into a human. Like it sort of converted me into a person. So in that way, through life, I've come to embrace the philosophy of Amor Fati. I will just, as I always do, I will make one quote and then I'll touch on a little philosophic idea and then silence myself. But I'm going to quote the great philosopher Deadpool. Actually his sidekick, Blind Owl, tells him, listen to pain. It's both history teacher and fortune teller. Pain teaches us who we are. So it's one way of looking at challenges that fate can dish up, is that you say, okay, what good can I build in this and of this? And finally, in terms of the amor part of the phrase, it's love, which is, it's actually a lot more than acceptance. It's like, how do you embrace and build, in it? And so I think there is an element, especially in Nietzsche's treatment of it, that is less passive. It's actually saying, okay, this is what you've been handed. How will you move it along? And the last thing I'll touch on is I'll then leap ahead to somebody who is in part influenced by Nietzsche, Martin Heidegger, and the whole idea of thrownness, that in life we are thrown into events. We are thrown into a world, and, accept it or not, it's what we have. And one of the things that I might come back to is thinking about relationships. That if you embrace your own fate, then you also have to think about others embracing theirs and then thinking how they interplay. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Joe. Over to you, Tulip, and then Simon after that.
So this is what Joe mentioned about what y'all experienced. This line came to me, that trauma is the mother of divinity. And trauma breaks the ego. It strips away illusions, forcing inner reflection. So whatever we experience. And from that breaking, a person seeks higher meaning or transcendence or God. And then we say it's this, and then we justify that this is what happened, and so it's for the good. If it wouldn't, then we wouldn't. So in a way, it's true, because only when we've been put through certain trials, our ego just uses, and that's for everyone. It's not like just a few of us. Obviously, it's trials and trauma that make us better people. Yeah.
Thank you, Tulip. Over to you, Simon, followed by Gagan.
Yeah, so I think this has all been like some really interesting kind of sketches and like ideas have kind of like been brought up of this, like, yeah, kind of like both this idea of like fate, kind of like the Fati part, and the Amor. I do want to like, I think like as has been mentioned, like there was ideas of this around before Nietzsche, but Nietzsche was really the one that like put a lot of structure to this and really kind of turn this into a very like definite like phrase. And I think at a shallow level, it's easy to see the similarities between like Nietzsche's idea of like Amor Fati and like the Stoics that came before. And while like Nietzsche had a lot of like respect for the Stoics, he's actually saying something like quite a bit more radical in a couple of ways. And I'm a big fan of Marcus Aurelius and of Nietzsche, so I'm not here to necessarily like say one is like better or worse, but I do want to kind of like put a little bit of daylight between these like camps. So a lot of the initial kind of like Stoics who are kind of really interested in this, like some of the like pre-Platonic like philosophers, there was this like concept of like apatheia, right? And so that basically you should kind of like train your brain to like a rational kind of like way of viewing the world, like where basically you could kind of see that like, when these kind of like terrible things happened, that there was like value in the world like for you, and that like that if you can kind of the universe is ultimately rational, and like that like it has like meaning to it. So I guess like the the closest kind of position, modern kind of thing I can think of to this kind of idea of like apatheia is like, everything happens for a reason. That like people sometimes like say in like a bad situation. And I think that's like closer to kind of like this idea of like apatheia, is just this like acceptance that like there's a meaning behind all of this and all of this is adding up. Um, that's like not what like Nietzsche was saying. And I think it's like worth like just like reading a little like quote of his, if that's okay. Um, so this idea of there being like a logos and like a meaning to the world, was kind of how Stoics thought about living in accordance to nature. And so Nietzsche said, "So you want to live according to nature," in quotes. "Oh, you noble Stoics, what a fraud is in this phrase. Imagine something like nature, profligate without measure, indifferent without measure, without purpose and regard, without mercy and justice, fertile and barren and uncertain at the same time. Think of indifference itself as power. How could you live according to this indifference? Living, isn't that wanting specifically to be something other than this nature? Isn't living assessing, preferring, being unfair, being limited, wanting to be different, and assuming your imperative, live according to nature basically amounts to live according to life? Well, how could you not? Why make a principle out of what you yourselves are and must be?" And so the quote continues, but I think what he's kind of like really kind of like trying to point out is just how random and kind of cruel the universe is, and that that he's really rejecting apatheia. It's not about having a sense of, oh, everything happens for a reason. It's that no, the universe is cruel, and it's much more a kind of idea of radical nihilism, that in the face of realizing that there is no higher power, there is no order of things above this, there's no consciousness at a higher level, at least according to Nietzsche, that you've still got to, in the face of that, have love, and that and a love for that, and that I think is to like understand like at least specifically what Nietzsche was kind of getting at with Amor Fati. And so just wanted to throw that in the mix, because I know that like the kind of Stoic idea of kind of acceptance, of kind of bad situations does actually end up coming from quite a different place. So
Thank you, Simon. That was just brilliant. Superb. Thank you, Simon. Over to you, Gagan.
I'll say that Amor Fati, that we like to uh, have this saying when times are tough, when there is struggle, it's really when this concept comes to mind. When we have some difficulties in front of us in life, we try to find we try to love our fate in front of us. And I was thinking about this this last week here, and as a thought came just randomly last week, just on a Friday afternoon, just about wrapping up work, and kind of your daily struggles with the 9 to 5 sometimes. And just thinking about it, if life had no struggles, it would be honestly boring. It's the challenges that makes things interesting, that gives us its meaning and growth. And in the spirit of Amor Fati, maybe the hard moments are just the obstacles, but they're the very thing that makes life vivid. Those struggling, those moments where you really have to believe in Amor Fati and the saying that we're all here gathered to talk about. So without that friction, there's no story, no reason to appreciate joy, or no chance to discover what we're really made of.
Thank you, Gagan. I'll go next. Amor Fati. Marcus Aurelius said, a bright, a blazing fire burns brighter when with anything that's thrown into it. Values are important in life, but values, when taken in extreme, can be toxic. Take honesty, for example. Honesty with no filter and no calibration can be destructive and toxic in our lives. It needs to be calibrated, it needs to be well thought of and well timed. So, Amor Fati is a sense of balance to your values. It is the reframing of your perceptions when situations can be rough. Sometimes the truth, when you look at it, can be bleak. And in such a situation, Amor Fati is looking for elegance, looking for happiness, looking for beauty in a bleak situation. And that helps balance, and it helps one find some kind of calm inside a storm. It is not about resignation or submission, it's about active acceptance. Hindu philosophy has its own version of Amor Fati, and that is Om Namah Shivaya, which means it's not about control all the time. There are elements and forces beyond you that are at work. Thank you. Paulina.
I've taken a few notes. First of all, I'm vaguely familiar with Nietzsche and the concept, but as a human being, I'm very familiar with Amor Fati because I think we all have to live it. It's basically something that every person on the planet has experienced hardship. Now, hardship is nature. The only thing that is constant in nature, in the universe, is change. That's the only constant that we have, is change. And so I think that the human brain, we tend to give value to things, good, bad, sad, happy, night, day, whatever. It is how we see it. Nature doesn't care about good or bad. What is, if you're eaten by a lion, it's bad for you, but it's great for the lion, right? So it depends which perspective, where you're sitting. So the universe is not concerned with what's good or bad for you, but we need to we navigate this world, and I believe there is a force in the universe that assists us, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't really have a value. It's more how we dance with it. And the reason I'm using the word dancing is because I'm more familiar with other philosophies that deal with similar aspects, like Tai Chi. So in Tai Chi, adversity and even the attack is seen like a dance. If you get a blow, you follow that blow. You don't fight it. You acknowledge, you take it with you, and you use that force to help you move into the next step. And so loving an adversity, I believe, is a fantastic concept, but I'm not sure at all times everybody can do it. It's possible. And I'm going to say how this, I believe, can happen. So I believe that sometimes when adversity hits us, when we don't embrace it, we live in denial. If you are in denial, you're not able to look at the problem. If you not acknowledge the problem, you're not able to help yourself to solve it. I find when you take, the love for your fate resides onto actually living and acknowledging your problem and being present to it. So going back to Zen philosophy, so I have mentioned this before, the word narikiru means to be 100% present to something. And that's when you are actually loving something. And whether this is good or bad, when you're present to something, the value of good or bad leaves. You're only remaining with what you're doing, and you're 100% present. You're actually loving it. So going back to Amor Fati, I believe it is possible. Thank you.
That was fabulous, just fabulous. Okay, Drake, before we come to you, Simon, can I request you to expand on what you said? Because everything you said just blew my mind. So after Drake, if you can go, that would be awesome. Unless someone else wants to, yeah. Drake, over to you, brother.
I sort of agree with most of what everyone has said here, including Paulina's comments last. And Amor Fati, my understanding of it from our discussion and what I've been reading is that you have to love all these challenges, all these things that happen, whether they're positive or negative. And I think there's value in a lot of that. A lot of challenges that happen, a lot of negative things that happen. If you accept it, embrace it, and find a way to use that to better yourself, better your situation, better your understanding of things, that's great. But there are some things that are just so terrible in that I don't see the value in actually loving them. I see the value in accepting them, accepting maybe that you can't change them, and that you have to work with the situation that you have. But to go as far as loving some of these horrible things that happen, whether it's to you or someone else, and I'm sure we can all think of an example right now, but um, I don't see the value in that portion of it. Um, I do see the value in the general idea of trying to be positive and get the good out of even the worst situations. But sometimes I just think that's not helpful and potentially, at least to some individuals, going to be detrimental if they're trying to love those worst scenarios. Um, but if it's the lesser the challenges on a smaller scale, um, or even some of the bigger ones that the person is capable of handling and using to move on, say it's an illness or something, and you can find a way to use that in a positive way, then it's great. But yeah, this is a sort of challenging to define what's going to be the best philosophy there. But I think it's sort of a blended philosophy. If you go too extreme, like on anything else, it can have negative effects too.
Thank you. I think we have a response from Paulina.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah. So I just really want to clarify that I agree you cannot love tragedy. Tragedy is difficult. Like, I lost my mom. I would never, when I was a kid, I would have never been in love with that. But when my kid had a diagnosis, I fell in love with the process of immersing myself in how to navigate out of it. And navigate out we did, basically, because with all the amount of time and effort that was put, basically, and Denise, you probably understand this where I'm coming from, because you put so much effort and love. There's no other word. You put so much love in what you're doing because you love your kid so much. There's no other word. This is the love that we are talking about. This is the word that Nietzsche was probably talking about. Nobody in their sane brain can be loving the death of a parent or the loss of a job, but you actually start loving the process that makes you come out of it and acknowledge. You soak it in. And that is what I believe these philosophers are talking. That's why Tai Chi actually talks about it. You dance with life. You can't avoid obstacles. The river cannot avoid the mountain and the rock. This is nature. And if water wasn't water, that's what they say in Buddhism, be like water. You need to mold yourself to whatever situation comes into life because the fight is what destroys you. It's the acknowledgement of it that helps you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulina. Wonderful again. Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, so I think there's been two really wonderful speakers that have really kind of in like Drake and Paulina just like kind of like really getting into some of the tensions of these themes, and I think to kind of like pick up on kind of like Drake's discomfort, kind of the word love. I think like I like in these kind of scenarios, I think like yeah, I'm also uncomfortable, but I think it's a little bit of a different formulation as to what like Nietzsche was talking about. I definitely have my own criticisms and like kind of critiques of the concept, but if I could guess kind of Nietzsche's reaction to seeing people kind of like only try and kind of like see the positive and the good and try and kind of like immediately go to the place of kind of like love for the world in the face of these horrible things, I think it would be a sort of a modern day kind of apatheia. It's definitely apatheia is kind of like a specific kind of like Stoic concept, but to maybe give some context that like Vin was hoping for, I think like there's two kind of big crises that, or like there's the crisis of nihilism that like Nietzsche's dealing with, and that then he's also like going back and kind of like revisiting kind of like this like early, like where did we kind of get this sense of like having like what he calls like a Hinterwelt, which is kind of, Plato's got an idea of like ideal platonic forms, this idea of like that then comes into Christianity of like a heaven where there's just like this metaphysical world above everything. And this is what like Nietzsche's often really like critiquing in his work and rejecting is that no, there is no kind of higher kind of Hinterwelt of like ideal platonic forms or kind of heaven or like whatever you want to call it. Like we've got to deal with kind of reality here and now, and that like the sort of if your immediate response to all this stuff is just kind of like complete love, then you're probably not accepting the more ugly side of yourselves, the tragedies, the passions, and that like Nietzsche was a big defender of kind of Dionysus, as it were, which is like something that kind of in kind of Greek philosophy that kind of came afterwards. There's this kind of this like idea of kind of the rational and like that kind of really got kind of promoted. That's like often much more kind of like associated with like Jupiter and things like that in kind of Greek ideas of like philosophy, and that like Dionysus is just this like this god of kind of passion, and like Nietzsche really defends that. And so I think like if you were to have a kind of passionate like the world's so fucked up, like this terrible tragic thing has happened to me, like that is part of you embracing your fate and like loving your fate kind of thing, and that like you aren't just kind of trying to go for this like equanimous kind of calm over the top of everything. And I probably got more to say, but I think I'll wrap it up on that and see if I can remember the other things I was supposed to talk about.
Thank you, Simon. That helps a lot. Thank you. Joe, over to you.
Well, yeah, one word that's come up a few times is tragedy. And so I just wanted to zero in on that term. One, of course, we recall it's Nietzsche's very first book was called The Birth of Tragedy, and then From the Spirit of Music. But and actually in that book, he really zeroes in on, we'll call it that the Apollonian versus the Dionysian tension in Greek culture. But just to zero in on the word tragedy, it's almost technical use as a word, and it's a widely misused word. It always involves, or it should, at least as a literary form, some kind of uplifting. So if it's if it's a story of just somebody's run over by a bus, the end. In literature, we would not formally acknowledge that as a tragedy. But if you think of Macbeth, where literally the fates are out to get him, or Hamlet, or King Lear, who just loses his marbles and wrecks everything. In each of those, through the suffering and through the outcome, and particularly in the Greek tragedies, I mean, it's pretty grim. Like, it's big. How much can one person take? Poor old Oedipus gets pummeled, and it's actually through that suffering and their example that others are uplifted by the story. So technically, tragedy is always about there is something that comes out of the negativity. And so maybe that's one way, but I do agree there. You think about the limits of what you can love in fate, and I certainly know, I know what those limits are. But thinking about the literary version of tragedy, thinking about, well, what can come out of it regardless. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Sorry, I just remembered the last the last point. I'll just leave it. And yeah, I think that's really thanks for that, Joe. The kind of the actual Greek idea of tragedy, I think, was very much what like Nietzsche was like often kind of thinking of. So I think one thought experiment that, as well as this idea of like eternal recurrence that Kirsten mentioned, and kind of linking back to Kirsten, this idea of like radical acceptance in terms of kind of how we actually like approach things, often from like doing kind of counseling, doing kind of potentially like trauma informed work, and this like there's this idea that's kind of quite cool. If like that I like of Nietzsche's, that it's like if you love one thing about your life, can you really just like remove that from the rest of your life, kind of thing? And that I think that's potentially where the love thing comes in, and that where you then end up having to kind of love everything that ended up making your life. And that doesn't mean that you somehow think that the death of the mother was a good thing in your life, or the denying the kind of real passions and like horrors that you kind of had in the face of those kind of tragedies. But that ultimately, when you're trying to kind of work with your life and have like a good response to it, often from like our own place, like that there just like simply is no utility in trying to kind of like pick and choose the parts of our life that have happened, that have brought us to. And so this is where I kind of talked about before, in terms of like it really being a kind of, how do you respond? I think it's less related to Stoicism. Ultimately, I think more in like nihilism, which is like, if you accept that there's no greater, higher kind of Hinterwelt, but you do love your life, then you kind of, like Nietzsche's point would be that you have no choice but to end up loving every part of your life, because that's kind of what has like led you to this point, and that then kind of allows you to carry on. And like I know that at some point when I was speaking this summer at a conference, there was this person who was an activist in kind of cybersecurity, and like it's going through a bit of a rough patch at the moment in terms of like funding, and lots of causes that people have held very dear to them, in terms of kind of local initiatives and things that they've been working for, have kind of really taken a battering, and that have kind of in many ways kind of had a massive step backwards in lots of ways in the funding of kind of protecting hospitals from cyber attacks, and a whole bunch of things that lots of people kind of spend their lives trying to help the world on. And one of the speakers actually mentioned Amor Fati, and it really showed to me the utility of, especially in activism and things like that, of how many people do you know that kind of bemoan the state of the world and want to kind of pick and choose the world, versus this kind of like, well, it's happening, as this activist said, it's kind of happening, and I just kind of have to fall in love with the process of fixing the world on this front. So hopefully that just completes the second thought that I was desperately trying to remember when I stopped before.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
I was trying to find a simple way to illustrate this, and sorry, it's off topic from what you just said, but I was just thinking my daughter would do that, because I love her to pieces, because she does these things all the time, right? Let's say the dishwasher breaks down, right? And for some people, when there's a problem that happens, the not Amor Fati part of a lot of us would say, oh my God, this is terrible. I'm not going to be able to do my dishes. I'm not going to be able to, host a party, whatever, I'm going to be spending too much money fixing whatever. So my daughter would go like, wow, there's a problem. Ooh, her eyes go, right? So she starts going on the internet and trying to fix it and dissect it. And although it's a terrible thing for her because she hates washing dishes, she loves the challenge of the problem. So I find with these Amor Fati or Tao theories, Tai Chi, the main thing is to always stare at the problem or the tragedy or the situation in the eye without judgment. Is this good or bad? It's not good or bad. Yes, it's a tragedy, or it's a sad thing to lose a parent. It's a sad thing to get a diagnosis. But I think the most important part is to leave that judgment out. It doesn't exist in nature. Nature doesn't know good or bad. And I think we need to live like nature so that we can actually do something about it and learn to love it. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. That was very powerful. Yes, Joe.
Really interesting. Like once you go down the path of Amor Fati, that I think one of the things that's interesting to think about is its relationship with resentment, and how people can feel towards their lot in life and how things are. And I think there's some power as well in the idea that in accepting your fate fully and loving it and sort of embracing it and sort of making of it what you can, it can, and perhaps this is one of the things that Nietzsche is up to, is sort of moving beyond that resentment, ressentiment, as the French would say, that can eat away and sort of bleed the life out of your life. And I think that almost like embracing a sense of fate or the cosmos or of nature being without meaning, without that sort of meta level of meaning, means you've got no one to be mad at. And I remember working with people who were really getting the short end of the stick, back to, where can there be good in this? And one of the questions is, why me? By what mechanism did I wind up receiving this, hand of cards? And a full acceptance means that you can hopefully move beyond sort of a resentment, or looking at other people and where they are and how life has sort of created a circumstance around them. And, perhaps through this, we really can move away from resentment, which strikes me as a very widespread sentiment in the world, and one we could probably do without or with less of.
Thank you, Joe. Over to you, Denise.
Yeah, actually, Joe, you just kind of you're scarily reading my mind, which is very frightening. But yeah, I mean, I've gone through some massive hardships in my life, and Pauline and I have a lot to relate to each other with children diagnosed with autism. But I find that it becomes like you have an expectation, right? So Antonia is my only child, and you see on TV how things are supposed to go and in books or whatever, and then a new normal supposedly is created. And so, you can enter the theory of relativity into this equation and say, okay, well, you know what, I have this situation, but relative to like the mass population or other, women my age or whatever you want to do, things aren't so bad, right? And I know people do that often, right, to help themselves maybe feel a little better, more in love, if you will, with their fate. To me, I try not to do that and just look at what's happening with me in the moment. Now, I say that very easily now. If you were to roll back 30 years, because Antonia just turned 29 in August. So if you were to roll back, when she was diagnosed, so 27 years, let's say, I could have never spoken about this the way I am right now. So evolution of myself, and suppressing of my ego around some of this and my expectations has really changed and shifted my viewpoint on being a mother of an autistic, a fairly severely autistic individual. But it becomes a new normal to the point where you then can cultivate gratitude. And I'm just picking that as an example, but there's lots of different examples to choose from in one's life. But when you enter gratitude into the equation, and not necessarily the theory of relativity, but just gratitude in general, I find that can really make a huge difference, even down to the most minute aspect of life. And I think everyone here is touched on tragedy, or what Nietzsche is trying to get at, and that the world is, the universe is random and cruel, but it's what we make of it and how we perceive through our lens the ability to not just turn something negative into a positive, because that's not so easily done, but being able to be grateful for what we do have and entering that theory of relativity into the equation when we need to. And I can give a million examples, which I won't. But I find that fascinating, how our ego is in that equation in there. And I'm sure, there's some rebuttal to that too, or not rebuttal, but just some additional information that I don't have right now to be able to explain that. But anyway, that's just my thought there.
Thank you, Denise. Drake, over to you, brother.
Yeah, one of the things that I had a bit of an issue with too here is um, the idea of fate. And I know there's different ways it can be looked at, but in general, uh, people think of fate as something sort of that's predetermined, that there's no way to change, and so you have to love that, and that is a bit of an issue because um, to say that it's predetermined would imply that there is someone, whether it's supernatural, a deity, or what, that controls that. Um, and if you look at it as if there's not, if it's all random chance in that, I don't think you have the same problem with why me, because why not you? Whereas if there is somebody controlling it, then why should it happen to you? Why is that controller letting this happen to you? Um, so I think you would still accept fate in the fact that it's the consequences that something has happened. But if you look at it as in fate, as in um, this was destined to happen to you, then I think that um, it, it's certainly a different viewpoint, and you can find more pessimistic outcomes that way, where you don't have to if you're not looking at it in that sense, right? That it's inevitable that you're going to have that fate. Um, and like I say, I know there's different interpretations of what fate might be, and to different people, it certainly means something different. So I'll just leave it there and let the next person pass on their thoughts.
Thank you, Drake. Yes, Simon.
Yeah, I think we're really getting to the confusing parts of everything. I think I do want to draw back to, I think, Kirsten's very excellent introduction, which is, I think, I certainly am not in the camp that the way to understand this is that the fate is something completely out of our control within this phrase. I think it's very much a phrase that is life affirming in terms of what we choose to do, but I do have issues with it. So I think this idea of eternal recurrence is really important to come back to, because I think this is kind of where Nietzsche formalizes his idea of fate, and where I start to potentially disagree with it a little bit. So he's got this idea of, yeah, as kind of Kirsten said, imagine that you would just continuously live on eternally, and that you were prepared to kind of just keep on living your life kind of thing, and that this kind of weight of kind of the eternal nature of a life led like that would kind of lead you to your fate, as it were, that that you would start acting in accordance with that weight kind of thing, and that's not about that, just kind of the kind of what the kind of Stoic said of kind of that there's this fate that you just gotta kind of accept, that's the universe just kind of dragging you around, and you've got to kind of go wherever it may kind of thing. Nietzsche was very much kind of about kind of our will to power, and kind of how we could actually exert ourselves. So I definitely don't think he's kind of just saying kind of accept everything that's out of your control kind of thing. but I did really enjoy reading The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which was like a bit of a, I didn't realize at the time when I was reading this, but like turns out like it is a bit of a direct response to Nietzsche, and starts to kind of agree, but also pull away from some of these ideas, and question the kind of like dichotomy between kind of lightness and kind of weight. And like, I think what Kundera might say about kind of what like Nietzsche's doing with the internal recurrence is like we're kind of we're being asked to lead a life that is ultimately more weighty. That like the thought experiment of having to think about leading a life over and over again is like trying to get the person who's doing that thought experiment to kind of get the full weight of their decisions. And what Kundera does in the book, which is really interesting, is he kind of shows different characters coming from different like arcs, where kind of like some kind of have from kind of their early experiences of life, um, do just have a kind of a kind of a natural kind of weight that they're potentially having to kind of get with the develop a relationship with the lightness of the world, so that they're not kind of like viewing the world through this kind of like eternal recurrence. They're not trying to kind of imbue meaning upon everything, and that like other characters like by default kind of have this kind of have this kind of relationship of likeness with things. They maybe, are okay with having multiple different partners, and that they don't see the kind of like point of kind of having kind of one kind of like very meaningful kind of heavy kind of marriage. And that I think the point that Kundera makes is that this isn't necessarily some kind of property that all of us have with life and that is imbued in life, but more our experiences shape like whether we're going to experience life as more kind of heavy or light, and that more than just like that's potentially more correct to think about in terms of like ourselves than just kind of forcing this like this thought experiment upon ourselves of like the eternal recurrence. As much as I think it's a really good like thought experiment, this is maybe where I start to pull away from Nietzsche, and like I think it ultimately starts becoming a bit more of a personal idea of like how do we relate, and what's a trajectory that makes like sense for like us in the life that we're going in, that I kind of reject Nietzsche's idea of just trying to make things more weighty, I guess.
Thank you, Simon. Gagan, you're next.
Yes, Simon, it is a great point that you brought up about Nietzsche, and about this topic about Amor Fati, as something that you mentioned, as Nietzsche didn't believe we're being dragged around by the universe. One thing I guess I argue on that, and it brings up this classical debate of free will versus determinism. And I kind of fall into the camp of determinism in this debate. So, it's there's billions of forces outside of our control from others people's choices. We've talked about parents. Parents ultimately made a choice where we're here and having this, and having this discussion here. So, random events just shaping every second of our lives. So in that sense, I kind of fall into that camp of we don't really have free will, and some of the ways that we imagine, or maybe from your point that you brought up, Simon, or the way maybe Nietzsche imagined it. But for Amor Fati, it isn't about despairing over that. What I think it's more about saying yes anyway, yes to the struggle, yes to the setbacks, yes to the unexpected things that happen, because those uncontrollable elements aren't interruptions in our life. They are life. They're part of that dance that Paulina mentioned. And our power is choosing. I guess we have power in choosing that embrace if we do or not. That's what Amor Fati is about. Is embracing those parts of life.
Thank you, Gagan. Beautiful. Yes, Denise.
Well, just to add on, then I guess the question in my mind becomes like, what if you don't embrace what comes your way? What is the fallout of that? Like, what is the flip side to that, right? So does that create stress? Does that, if there isn't acceptance at one point about something that, and I'm not saying I totally agree that we're not just flying around with, like there's already a predetermined fate. We have choices we can make, and we make them. But coming back to the phrase that I quoted at the beginning from Marcus Aurelius about welcome every event as if you had chosen it. I guess the question in my mind is, what if you don't do that? What is the consequence of not welcoming those events in some regard, whether you amplify it into a positive affect, or whether you go the other direction and deny it, right? So is there a fallout there, or a consequence of at least not recognizing that things happen for a reason sometimes?
I don't think Amor Fati means resignation to your fate. It means fully acknowledging it, welcoming it, and then dealing with it the best you can. So the saying goes, if a door shuts on you, you open it. So that you can do that even with Amor Fati. Over to you, Gagan.
Yeah, I was just gonna just touch on that as well, Denise. It's great that you brought that up. I think Denise, just even prior, when you were speaking about your experience of your personal experience with your daughter, and maybe 27 years ago you weren't able to kind of speak on this, and now you are, and you're letting go your ego. I think that's what it is. You kind of let go of those roadblocks. You evolve in that struggle, and now you can, as Paulina beautifully put it, you can be the water. It flows out. It's not that roadblock in your life, and similar to what Vin says, you can open that door instead of the way you say, Denise, that ego was in front of your face, and it kind of blocked you from opening that.
Thank you, Gagan. Yes, Paulina.
Just a short answer. So what happens if you don't embrace what's coming to you? Well, you get stuck. That I think that's what it is, well, there's people I have a friend that she was trying to learn math, right? And she was not good at it. And she's like, I'm not good at it and I can't do it. And so, she failed. She failed the courses that we were doing. She was excellent at everything else, but she just decided that she's not going to take on because she wasn't born for it. Now, I know a lot of people who have something that they're really bad at it, and they go like, well, you have to first acknowledge that you're really bad at something, because if you live in the denial that, oh, well, the optimism, I find optimism sometimes toxic, because optimism without action is toxic. You can't just wait for the angels to come and give you the knowledge. You have to put on the work. But first of all, you have to acknowledge that you're terrible at something, and then you move on to accept it. So that's the answer. You get stuck if you don't really acknowledge it.
Thank you, Paulina. Yes, Simon.
Yeah, I guess just building on that, like yeah, I think I've like shared this story before, but just in this context, my partner is a speech language pathologist, and she gets to help a lot of different folks, and I think one thing that, like, a story she's told me before, that like in terms of this idea of like love, that seems to be kind of tripping up, like, I know myself, and I think potentially others in this conversation. And like and this kind of like acceptance, I think like having kind of negative reactions is actually not necessarily as contradictory to the idea of like love as like we think. And like in the sense of like these patients that my partner would have, like sort of you can kind of broadly like divide into kind of three people. There's the people that are like, yes, kind of welcome the challenge, very much kind of like the traditional kind of thing we would think of as like Amor Fati. And then there's the folks that are kind of like, oh, I'm so terrible at this, like I'm awful kind of thing. And then there's the people that are just sort of a little bit kind of indifferent and a bit kind of apathetic. And it's actually the first two that you can help out much more, and that are actually much less even though that their reactions seem much more contradictory on the surface. Actually, like under the hood, like you both are kind of have a motivation, right? There is a sort of, I think, a sort of a weird acceptance even in the person that's like, I'm so rubbish at this, because they're accepting like I am rubbish at this, and like there's a desire to be better. And so I think like and like I know myself that like a lot of the growth that I've had to do has actually been to do with not being acquiescent, and actually being potentially kind of like negative and um kind of yeah and not just sort of like kind of loving in a shallow sense of the word. So I guess like this is for me where we can take words like love and kind of really think about them in just terms of like, oh, a kind of happy, kind of loving kind of sense. Whereas I think that's a little bit misleading if you kind of really love what you're attached to and you want to do better in therapy, then okay, cool, that can look a lot like kind of negativity and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if that's like helpful for folks to think about, but I try and think about that stuff when I'm trying to kind of dissect a word like love.
Thank you, Simon. This session has been beautiful. It's pulled me in many directions. I'm sure everyone else has felt the same. It's been lovely. Thank you so much. We'll end here for today.